The soft golden light from the crystal chandeliers hung low over the banquet hall, reflecting off the polished silverware and the expensive wine glasses filled with deep red liquid. It was the kind of place that smelled of roasted lamb, expensive perfume, and fresh flowers. The room was buzzing with the low, comfortable hum of 200 people talking, laughing, and enjoying the celebration. Everyone was dressed in their finest clothes, suits that probably cost more than a month's rent, and dresses that rustled softly when the women moved. In the middle of all this luxury, moving like a ghost through the crowd, was a young woman named Lisa. She was 22 years old, with her hair pulled back tight into a bun that was starting to hurt her scalp. She wore the standard uniform for the catering staff, a crisp white shirt, a long black apron that tied around her waist, and comfortable black shoes that had seen better days. Her feet were throbbing. She had been standing and walking for 6 hours straight, carrying heavy trays, clearing dirty plates, and refilling water glasses before anyone even realized they were empty. Lisa was used to being invisible. It was part of the job description. To the guests at the wedding, she was just a pair of hands that poured the coffee or removed the used napkins. They looked right through her as if she were a piece of furniture. She didn't take it personally. She knew that when people paid a lot of money for a wedding, they wanted to feel like royalty, and the staff were there to make that happen without getting in the way. She moved to a round table near the back where a group of older men and women were sitting. They were laughing loudly about something, their faces flushed with happiness and maybe a little bit too much wine. "Excuse me, miss," one of the men said, not looking up from his plate. "Can we get some more water over here and maybe take these away?" "Of course, sir," Lisa said softly, putting on her polite customer service voice. She reached across the table to collect the dirty plates, balancing them carefully on her arm. Her movements were quick and practiced. She had been doing this work since she was a teenager to help pay the bills at home. As she cleared the table, she couldn't help but overhear their conversation. They were talking about the bride and groom, sharing memories about when the couple were children. "He was such a rambunctious boy," one woman said, wiping her mouth with a linen napkin. "Always running around. I never thought he'd settle down." "Well, he found a good one," the man replied. "Did you see the dress? It must have cost a fortune." The father of the bride certainly spared no expense today. Lisa nodded politely as she poured fresh water into their glasses, but she wasn't really part of the conversation. She was just the backdrop. Once the table was taken care of, she turned and headed back toward the kitchen area, her eyes scanning the room for any other empty glasses or crumpled napkins. As she walked, she passed by a large open space near the front of the room. That was where the dancing would happen later. But right now, it was empty. On the far left side of that space, standing alone and looking very grand, was a shiny black baby grand piano. Lisa slowed down her walking as she got closer to it. The piano was beautiful. It had a high gloss finish that reflected the lights above it. The lid was propped open, showing off the strings inside. It looked perfect, like it had never been touched. She stopped for just a moment, looking around to make sure nobody was watching her closely. The kitchen supervisor was busy yelling at a waiter about a dropped tray, and the guests were all busy eating and talking. Lisa took a small step closer to the instrument. She looked at the keys. They were white ivory, smooth and inviting. There was no sheet music on the stand. It was just sitting there, silent. Lisa felt a sudden tightness in her chest. It wasn't from the heavy lifting or the long hours. It was a feeling she always got when she saw a piano. It was a mix of longing and sadness. She reached out with her right hand, her fingers trembling just a little bit. She wanted to touch the keys, just to press one down and hear the sound, but she pulled her hand back. She knew she couldn't. She was on the clock. She was the help. You don't just sit down and play the piano at a high-end wedding when you are supposed to be clearing tables. She sighed and adjusted the tray in her hands, turning her back on the instrument, but her mind stayed there. Her thoughts drifted back to her childhood. She remembered the small, cramped apartment she grew up in. It wasn't like this fancy hall. The walls were thin, and you could hear the neighbors arguing through the vents. But in the living room, squeezed in between the sofa and the television, was an old upright piano. It was scratched, and some of the keys stuck when you pressed them, especially when it was humid. It had a smell of dust and old wood. Her mother used to play that old piano. Her mom wasn't a concert pianist or a famous musician. She was just a nurse who worked long shifts at the hospital. But when she came home, took off her shoes, and sat down at that bench, she changed. The tiredness would fade from her face. She would play simple melodies, sometimes classical pieces, sometimes songs from the radio. Lisa would sit on the floor next to the bench, leaning her head against her mother's leg, listening to the music flow through the small apartment. For that hour every evening, nothing else mattered. The bills that were piling up on the kitchen counter didn't matter. The stress of her mother's job didn't matter. It was just the music. It was the only time Lisa ever saw her mother truly happy and free. Music is the only thing that makes sense, her mother used to tell her, smiling down while her fingers moved across the yellowed keys. It's the only thing you can count on. Lisa remembered the day they had to sell the piano. She was 14. Her mother had gotten sick and couldn't work for a while. The medical bills were overwhelming. Lisa had come home from school to see two strangers carrying the piano out the front entrance. She remembered the horrible empty sound it made when they bumped the door frame. The living room felt twice as big without it. It felt cold and quiet. Her mother stood by the window, crying silently, clutching a check in her hand that would pay for the medicine but couldn't fix the hole in their hearts. After the piano was gone, the apartment was never the same. The music stopped, and the stress took over completely. Her mother got better eventually, but she never played again. There was no money for lessons, and there was no instrument to practice on. Lisa had tried to learn on a cheap keyboard she found at a garage sale, using headphones so she wouldn't disturb the neighbors, but it wasn't the same. The keys were plastic and light, not heavy and weighted like a real piano. Eventually, even that keyboard broke, and life just got in the way. Now, 10 years later, Lisa was working in this fancy hall, surrounded by wealth she couldn't imagine, looking at a piano that cost more than the car she drove. She wondered who would play it tonight. The wedding program had mentioned a live band, but the band members were currently on break, hanging out by the bar or outside smoking. "Hey, Lisa. Stop daydreaming." The sharp voice of the banquet manager snapped her back to reality. She jumped slightly and turned around. "Table 12 needs their dessert menus. Now," the manager barked, holding a clipboard like a weapon. "I'm on it," Lisa said, straightening her apron and forcing a smile. She walked away from the beautiful piano and toward table 12. As she walked, she felt a heavy weight in her stomach. It wasn't just hunger. It was the weight of missed opportunities and the feeling of being stuck in a routine that didn't leave any room for the things she used to love. She watched the guests laughing and eating, wondering if any of them realized how lucky they were. They were worried about the centerpieces or the wedding favors. She was worried about rent and the feeling that she was losing a part of herself that used to make her feel alive. She handed the menus to the guests at table 12, keeping her smile fixed and bright. "Here are the desserts, folks. Enjoy." "Thank you, dear," an older lady said, finally making eye contact with her. "You've been working so hard. You look exhausted." Lisa paused for a second, surprised by the kindness. "I'm all right, thank you. It's a beautiful wedding." "It is," the lady agreed. "But I think they need some music. It's too quiet in here." Lisa looked back across the room toward the corner where the piano sat waiting in the silence. The band was still nowhere to be seen. The room did feel a little empty without music, just like her old living room. She mentally shook the thought away. She had a job to do. There were coffee cups to fill and plates to clear. But the image of the keys stayed in the back of her mind, glowing softly under the lights, waiting for someone who wasn't afraid to play them. The energy in the banquet hall had shifted from the quiet elegance of dinner to the loud, excited buzz that always happens after the cake is cut. The servers were moving fast now, clearing away the dessert plates and wiping down the tables to make room for the dancing. Lisa felt the ache in her lower back getting worse, but she kept moving. There was no time to stop. The night was far from over. She made her way to the back of the room to drop off a stack of dirty dishes at the service station. As she rounded a corner near a large potted plant, she almost bumped into someone. It was an older man, leaning heavily on a polished wooden cane. He was standing a bit away from the main crowd, looking around with a confused expression on his face. Lisa stepped aside quickly to let him pass. "Oh, excuse me, sir. I'm so sorry," she said, clutching a pile of napkins. The man didn't move right away. He turned his head slowly toward her voice. His eyes were a bit cloudy, a milky blue color that suggested his vision wasn't what it used to be. He was dressed in a sharp tuxedo, but his tie was slightly loosened, and he looked tired. "It's quite all right, my dear," he said. His voice was shaky but warm. "I was just trying to get my bearings. It seems the room has gotten rather crowded all of a sudden. Can I help you find your table, sir, or maybe the restroom?" Lisa asked, shifting her weight from one sore foot to the other. The man shook his head gently. "No, no. My table is right over there, somewhere. My grandson is the groom. I'm Mr. Henderson." Lisa smiled warmly. "Congratulations, Mr. Henderson. It is a beautiful wedding." "Thank you," he said, looking out over the sea of heads. "It is. But I seem to have lost track of things. I was looking for the music. Is the band not playing yet?" Lisa looked over at the stage area. The musicians had set down their instruments and were currently mingling near the bar, drinking sodas and chatting. The floor was empty. "I think they are on a break, sir. They should be back soon." Mr. Henderson let out a long, heavy sigh that seemed to deflate his whole posture. He gripped the handle of his cane until his knuckles turned white. He looked down at the floor, tapping the tip of his cane against the carpet. It was a restless tap, like he was keeping a beat in his head. "A break," he muttered. "Yes, of course. Young people need their breaks." He stood there for a moment, looking lost. Lisa stayed where she was, sensing that he didn't want to be left alone just yet. She knew she should get back to work, but something in his manner made her pause. He looked like a man who was carrying a heavy burden, much heavier than the cane he was holding. "Is everything okay?" she asked gently. Mr. Henderson looked up at her, and for a second, his eyes seemed to clear up, filled with a sudden intensity. "I made a promise," he said softly. "A long time ago. To my wife. She passed away 4 years ago today. On our 50th anniversary, actually." Lisa felt a sudden lump in her throat. She forgot about her tired feet and the waiting dishes. "I am so sorry for your loss, Mr. Henderson." She loved music, he continued, a small, sad smile touching his lips. "We used to dance at every wedding we ever went to. It didn't matter if it was a waltz or a jitterbug. She would drag me onto the floor. Before she got sick, she made me promise that even if she wasn't here, I would still dance. She said, 'George, you don't stop living just because I'm not in the room.'" He chuckled, but it sounded wet and thick with emotion. "I told her I would. I told her I'd dance one more time at our grandson's wedding." He looked toward the empty dance floor again, his shoulders slumping. "But there is no music. I can't hear the rhythm in my head anymore. The silence is too loud. I suppose I'm just too late. The moment has passed." He looked down at his feet, looking so small and frail in his big tuxedo. "I feel like I'm letting her down. I just wanted to feel that way one more time, like we were still young and the whole night was ahead of us." Lisa's heart broke for him. She could see the genuine pain in his face. It wasn't just about a dance, it was about honoring a memory and keeping a connection to the person he loved most in the world. The party was going on all around them, people laughing, glasses clinking, but in this little corner near the potted plant, there was just a lonely old man and the overwhelming silence he was afraid of. She looked toward the stage. The band was still at the bar, laughing at a joke. They wouldn't be back for at least 10 or 15 minutes. By then, maybe Mr. Henderson would be too tired, or maybe the feeling would pass, or maybe he would just go back to his table and sit in the corner, watching everyone else have fun. That thought made her feel angry. Not at the band, but at the unfairness of it. Life seemed to be full of these moments where you needed something, and it just wasn't there. "You aren't letting her down, Mr. Henderson," Lisa said firmly. "You are right here. You wanted to dance. That counts." He shook his head. "It isn't the same without the music, my dear. I can't just shuffle around on the carpet. I need the beat. I need to feel it in my chest." Just then, the groom, a tall, young man who looked like a younger version of Mr. Henderson, came walking over. He looked worried. "Grandpa? There you are, I was looking for you. Are you okay? Do you need to sit down?" The groom looked from his grandfather to Lisa, obviously concerned. The older generation often tried to hide their struggles from the younger ones to not be a bother. Mr. Henderson waved his hand dismissively, trying to put on a brave face. "I'm fine, boy. Just talking to this nice young lady. Just resting my legs." "You look like you're upset," the groom said gently, putting a hand on the old man's shoulder. "We can get you a chair. Or we can go outside for some fresh air." "No, no," Mr. Henderson said, a hint of frustration in his voice. "I don't need air. Never mind. It doesn't matter." Lisa saw the groom look helplessly at his grandfather. He didn't know what to do. He was busy, he had guests to greet, and he had no idea how to fix the specific kind of sadness his grandfather was feeling. He couldn't just snap his fingers and make a band appear. The silence between the three of them stretched out. It was heavy and awkward. The groom was checking his watch, Mr. Henderson was staring at the floor, and Lisa was standing there with a handful of dirty napkins, feeling like she was witnessing a tragedy in slow motion. She looked over at the piano again. It was sitting there, just 5 feet away from Mr. Henderson. It was closed up, silent, and ignored. The black finish gleamed under the lights. It looked like a sleeping beast waiting to be woken up. It was the only thing in the room that could solve this problem right now. Lisa's mind started racing. She knew she shouldn't. She knew it was against the rules. It was probably even against the law of weddings for a waitress to touch the expensive instruments. If she played badly, or if she played the wrong song, or if she broke something, she would lose her job. She needed this job. She needed the paycheck to pay her rent and buy groceries. But then she looked at Mr. Henderson's face. He looked like he was fading away right in front of her. The spark in his eyes was going out. He had kept a promise to his wife to show up, but he couldn't finish it without a little help. And help wasn't coming. The band was drinking. The groom was distracted. The guests were oblivious. Lisa felt a strange sensation in her hands. It was like they were itching, waking up after a long sleep. She remembered what her mother used to say. Music is the only thing you can count on. Her mother would have walked right over to that piano and played until the old man danced. The groom was guiding his grandfather toward a chair against the wall. "Come on, Grandpa, let's sit down for a bit. The music will start soon." "I guess so," the old man mumbled, defeated. "I guess I'll just watch." Lisa took a deep breath. Her heart was hammering against her ribs so hard she could hear it in her ears. It was a crazy idea. It was a reckless idea. But as she watched Mr. Henderson lower himself slowly into the chair, looking like a party balloon that had lost its helium, she knew she couldn't just walk away. She put the dirty napkins down on a nearby tray. She smoothed down her apron. She wiped her sweaty palms on the sides of her uniform pants. She wasn't a waitress right now. She was a girl who remembered how to play. She was the granddaughter of a woman who loved music. She was the only person in the room who could fix this. Without saying a word to the groom or the grandfather, Lisa turned away from the service station. She took a step toward the piano. Then another. Her legs felt wobbly, but her mind was made up. She was going to play, even if it was only for a minute. She just hoped that her hands remembered what to do. The walk from the safety of the service station to the grand piano felt like the longest walk of Lisa's life. It was only about 20 feet, but with every step, her heart beat harder against her ribs. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, confused stares trailing her movements. In a room full of expensive suits and flowing gowns, a young woman in a black apron walking with purpose toward the stage was definitely out of place. Her hands were sweating. She wiped them discreetly on her pants again, terrified that they would slip on the keys. She kept her head down, focusing on the polished black wood of the instrument. It looked bigger now that she was right in front of it. It wasn't just a piece of furniture anymore, it was a beast waiting to be tamed. Lisa reached the piano and stopped. The bench was tucked in neatly. She reached down and pulled it out. The scraping sound of the metal legs against the temporary dance floor was louder than she expected. It cut through the low hum of conversation like a knife. Heads turned. People stopped eating their cake. "What is she doing?" a woman's voice whispered loudly from a nearby table. "Is she cleaning it?" "I think she thinks she's a guest," a man laughed, a cruel, short sound that made Lisa's face burn hot. She ignored them. She sat down on the bench. It was firm and comfortable. As she scooted forward, her height aligned perfectly with the keys. Her fingers hovered over the ivory, trembling slightly. For a second, the reality of the situation crashed down on her. She was a server. She had no right to be here. If the manager came out right now, she would be fired on the spot. No questions asked. She would be escorted out, and she would lose the paycheck she desperately needed. But then she glanced over her shoulder toward the chairs against the wall. Mr. Henderson was slumped forward, his chin resting on his chest, looking at his cane. The groom was standing beside him, looking at his phone, probably texting the bride or checking on the schedule. The old man looked so small. He was disappearing into the background, just like Lisa usually did. That sight steeled her nerves. It didn't matter if she got fired. Some things were more important than keeping a job. Some moments only happen once, and if you miss them, they are gone forever. Lisa took a deep, shaking breath. She closed her eyes for a moment. She blocked out the lights, the smell of the food, the murmurs of the confused crowd, and the fear. She let her mind travel back to that drafty living room. She saw the old scratched piano. She saw her mother's hands. She felt the rhythm of the music that used to fill their home. She opened her eyes and placed her left hand on the low notes and her right hand on the high notes. She didn't need sheet music. She knew the song better than she knew her own name. It was her mother's favorite. It was the song her mother hummed while she cooked dinner. It was the song that could make a sad house feel warm. Lisa pressed down the first key. The sound was rich and full, resonating through the large hall. The note hung in the air, silencing the whispers immediately. Then came the second note, and the third. It was the opening of Debussy's Clair de Lune, which means moonlight. It started soft and slow, like moonlight rising over a dark ocean. The melody was simple, sad, and incredibly beautiful. At first, the room was so quiet you could hear the ice melting in the drinks. The laughter died instantly. The clinking of silverware stopped. The people who were laughing at her just seconds ago were now frozen with their forks halfway to their mouths. Lisa felt a change happen inside her the moment her fingers started to dance across the keys. The fear evaporated. Her back straightened. The waitress who was tired and hungry disappeared. In her place was a musician, confident and expressive. Her fingers, which had been stiff and cold from carrying trays, suddenly felt loose and warm. They remembered exactly what to do. They found the patterns on their own. She played the first few measures with a gentle touch, letting the notes ring out clearly. The acoustics in the banquet hall were amazing. The sounds seemed to wrap around the room, hugging the walls and the ceiling. It was much louder and clearer than the old keyboard she had practiced on in her bedroom years ago. She risked another quick glance at Mr. Henderson. The sound had cut through his daze. He lifted his head slowly, his cloudy eyes widening. He turned toward the piano, looking for the source of the music. He saw Lisa sitting there, her back to him, her hands moving gracefully over the keys. A look of pure wonder spread across his face. It was like he was seeing a ghost, or a miracle. He reached out with his free hand and tapped his cane on the floor, finding the beat. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It was a slow, swaying waltz time. Lisa saw him react and it gave her a burst of courage. She poured more emotion into the music. She wasn't just hitting the right notes anymore, she was telling a story with them. She played the rising parts of the melody with a hopeful lift, and the falling parts with a sweet, aching sadness. She thought about her mother. She thought about how much she missed playing. She poured all that longing into the song. The guests were mesmerized. At table after table, people turned their chairs toward the piano. They stopped checking their phones. They stopped gossiping. They just listened. There was something hypnotic about watching a young woman in a humble uniform producing such a high level of art. It broke the barrier between the staff and the guests. For these few minutes, there were no waiters and no VIPs. There was just the music. A young child near the front stopped fidgeting and stared, open-mouthed, at Lisa's fingers flying across the keys. The bride, who had been in the restroom fixing her veil, walked back into the room. She stopped in the doorway, holding her dress up, listening to the melody fill the air. She looked toward the groom with a huge smile on her face, nodding approvingly. Even the manager, the strict man with the clipboard, had stepped out of the kitchen. He stood by the service station, his mouth slightly open. He looked ready to yell, but the music stopped him. He stood there, listening, just like everyone else. He seemed to realize that yelling right now would be like shouting in a library. It would be a crime against the moment. Lisa was lost in the flow. She didn't think about the next note, she just let it happen. Her body swayed slightly with the rhythm. The music washed over her, cleansing the stress of the long day. For the first time in years, she felt like herself again. Not the tired worker, not the invisible servant, but Lisa the pianist. She reached the climax of the piece, where the music gets louder and the chords become deeper. Her left hand jumped down the keyboard, creating a rolling wave of sound that felt like the ocean tide coming in. It was powerful and emotional. It was the kind of sound that makes the hair on your arm stand up. She saw Mr. Henderson trying to stand up. The groom quickly moved to help him, holding his arm steady. The old man pushed himself up, leaning heavily on his cane, but his eyes were locked on the piano. He wasn't looking at Lisa, he was looking past her, perhaps seeing a different room, a different time. He was seeing the dance floor from 50 years ago. He was seeing his wife. Lisa softened the volume as the piece moved toward its end. The agitation of the middle section faded away, replaced by the gentle, peaceful melody from the beginning. It was like the sun coming up after a storm. The notes became slower, wider, breathing more. She played the final chords. A deep, resonant harmony in the left hand, and a high, sparkling melody in the right. She let the sound linger, holding her hands over the keys, letting the vibration fade into the air until there was nothing left but silence. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the air is charged with electricity. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The room was perfectly still. Lisa sat there, her chest heaving slightly, her hands hovering over the keys. She was terrified to turn around. She didn't know what she would find. Would they be angry? Would they be laughing? Then, a single sound broke the silence. It was the sharp tap of a cane against the floor. Tap, tap, tap. Lisa turned around on the bench. Mr. Henderson was standing tall, his eyes shining with tears. He was looking right at her, a wide, grateful smile on his face. He raised his hand slowly and began to clap. It was a slow, rhythmic clap. The sound of Mr. Henderson's clapping seemed to break a spell that had fallen over the entire banquet hall. For a moment, nobody moved, and then, like a wave crashing on a shore, the rest of the room followed his lead. It started with the people sitting closest to the front, the ones who could see the tears in the old man's eyes. They stood up first. Then the people near the back stood up to see what the fuss was about. Within seconds, 200 people were on their feet. The sound was thunderous. It wasn't the polite, half-hearted clapping you usually hear at a wedding when someone finishes a speech. This was loud, rhythmic, and intense. It was the kind of applause that rattled the windows and made the crystal glasses on the tables vibrate. Lisa sat frozen on the piano bench, her hands hovering over the keys. Her face felt incredibly hot, flushing a deep shade of red. She was not used to being the center of attention. For years, her job had been to blend in, to be the person in the background who made sure things ran smoothly without being noticed. Now, every single pair of eyes in the room was fixed on her. She felt exposed, like she was standing under a spotlight without anywhere to hide. But as the clapping continued, washing over her like a warm tide, the fear began to mix with something else. It was a sense of shock. She realized they weren't clapping because they were being nice. They were clapping because the music had touched them. She had actually done it. She had played her heart out, and they had heard her. Mr. Henderson was still clapping, but now he was also using his cane to tap the beat on the floor. Thump, clap, thump, clap. He looked over at his grandson, the groom, and nodded his head vigorously. The groom, looking a bit dazed but happy, gave his grandfather a thumbs up and then turned his attention to Lisa. The groom walked over to the piano, stepping up onto the low stage. The crowd quieted down just a little, sensing he was going to say something. Lisa looked up at him, terrified she was about to get a lecture. Instead, the young man held out his hand to help her stand up. "That," he said, his voice shaking slightly so he could be heard, "was the most beautiful thing I have ever heard. Thank you." Lisa took his hand and stood up. Her legs felt wobbly, like jelly. She offered a shy, small smile. I hope I didn't break any rules," she whispered. The groom laughed and shook his head. "Forget the rules. You made my grandfather's night. You probably made his year." He turned back to the crowd and raised his glass. "Everyone. A toast to—" "I'm sorry, what was your name?" "Lisa," she squeaked out, feeling her face burn even hotter. "A toast to Lisa," the groom shouted. "To Lisa." The crowd roared back. Then they started clapping again. Lisa looked toward the corner where the manager usually stood. She saw him standing by the service station, his clipboard tucked under his arm. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't firing her. He was actually clapping, too. He gave her a small, respectful nod and turned back to the kitchen, probably to tell the staff to get back to work but to let Lisa have her moment. The band, who had come back from their break during the performance, were standing near the stage. They looked a little embarrassed, realizing that a waitress had just upstaged them with a solo piano performance. The piano player, a guy with long hair in a vest, didn't look angry, though. He looked impressed. He caught Lisa's eye and gave her a nod of respect that meant more than any compliment from the guests. It was a musician acknowledging another musician. But the most important reaction was still coming from Mr. Henderson. The groom helped the old man up the 2 steps onto the stage area. Lisa moved aside to give them space, thinking they might want to say a few words to the audience. Mr. Henderson moved slowly, leaning on his cane, but his eyes were bright and clear. He didn't look at the microphone the groom was pointing at. He looked directly at Lisa. "You know, young lady," the old man said, his voice a bit raspy but strong. "I told my wife, Martha, on the day she died that I would keep dancing. But I haven't danced since she left. The music hasn't been right. It hasn't felt real." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces, then back at her. "When you played that song, The Moonlight, it was like she walked right back into the room. I could feel her hand on my shoulder. I could smell her perfume. You brought her back to me for a few minutes. Thank you. Lisa felt tears stinging the corners of her eyes. She tried to blink them away, but one escaped and rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it with the sleeve of her uniform. I just wanted you to have your dance, she said softly. And I will, Mr. Henderson said firmly. He looked over at the band. The piano player immediately understood. Without waiting for instructions, the band leader signaled his group, and they began to play softly. They picked up the melody that Lisa had just played, backing it with a gentle, swaying rhythm. Mr. Henderson looked at Lisa. Would you do me the honor, he asked, extending a hand that trembled slightly. Or would you get in trouble for dancing with a guest? Lisa looked over at the kitchen door. She knew her break was over. She knew there were stacks of dishes waiting. But she also knew that moments like this were rare. This was the kind of story she would tell when she was 80 years old. I think I can take a few minutes, Lisa said. She placed her hand in his. It was warm and calloused. He led her to the center of the dance floor, right under the glow of the chandeliers. The guests made a circle around them, watching with smiles. Mr. Henderson couldn't dance like he used to. He couldn't spin or dip. He shuffled his feet, holding onto Lisa's hand for balance. Lisa moved slowly with him, guiding him gently, matching her steps to his slow pace. It wasn't a professional performance. It was just two people moving to the music. As they danced, Lisa felt a strange sense of peace. The anxiety about her bills, the tiredness in her muscles, the worry about her future, it all faded away. She wasn't worrying about the next table or the angry manager. She was just there, in the moment, helping this man keep a promise. She looked at the guests watching them. They weren't looking at her as a waitress anymore. They were looking at her with warmth and admiration. She saw the bride wiping tears from her eyes. She saw the tough-looking manager wiping his eye. It was as if the music had melted away the invisible wall that usually separated the staff from the guests. For a few minutes, everyone in the room was just a human being, connected by the song. The song wasn't very long. It was just a chorus or two. But for Mr. Henderson, it was enough. When the music slowed down, he stopped shuffling. He squeezed Lisa's hand tight. Thank you, Lisa, he whispered, leaning in close so only she could hear. You have a gift. Don't let them put it in a box and bury it. Your mother, she would be so proud of you. Lisa froze. How did you know? About your mother, Mr. Henderson smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. You can hear it in the way you play. You play like someone who is remembering love. You don't play like someone who is just reading notes. You play from the heart. He patted her hand and slowly let go. I think I need to go sit down now. My old legs have had enough excitement for one night. The groom stepped forward to help his grandfather back to his seat. As Mr. Henderson walked away, the crowd burst into applause again, but this time it was different. It was a thank you. Lisa stood alone on the dance floor for a moment. She looked around the room. The spell was starting to break. The waiters were moving again, picking up glasses. The band was launching into a faster, more upbeat song to get the party started again. The guests were turning back to their conversations, though they kept glancing over at her with smiles. She took a deep breath. The magic was fading, and reality was rushing back in. Her feet started to ache again. She remembered the pile of coffee cups waiting at table 12. She knew she had to get back to work. But as she walked off the dance floor, Something inside her felt lighter. The heavy, invisible weight she had been carrying on her shoulders for years, the feeling that she was stuck and invisible, was gone. She had been seen. She had been heard. She had made a difference. She walked past the piano one last time. It looked just the same as it had an hour ago, shiny, black, and silent. But it felt different to her now. It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a tool. It was a voice. Lisa smoothed her apron, fixed her bun, and headed back toward the kitchen. She knew she had to go wash dishes and clear tables. She knew that tomorrow she would have to wake up and do it all over again. But she also knew that she wouldn't be just a waitress anymore. She was a musician who had played the most important gig of her life. And nobody, not even the grumpiest manager, could take that away from her. As the night went on, the banquet hall slowly transitioned from a place of wonder back into a place of work. The band was now playing loud, upbeat pop songs that filled the air with bass and energy. The younger guests were crowding the dance floor, jumping and singing along. The magic of the piano performance was starting to fade into the background, becoming just another memory in the flow of the evening. For Lisa, however, the feeling hadn't faded. It was still buzzing under her skin, a warm electric sensation that made her fingers tingle. But reality was calling her name, and it was calling loudly. She walked back into the kitchen, the heavy swing door shutting out the noise of the party. Inside the kitchen, the atmosphere was chaotic. Steam was rising from the big dishwashing machines. Chefs were yelling out orders for late-night snacks, and clatter was everywhere. Lisa expected the worst. She expected the manager to be waiting for her with a pink slip or a harsh lecture about professionalism. Instead, she found him leaning against the stainless steel counter, sipping a cup of black coffee. He looked up as she entered. His face was serious, but it wasn't angry. "Lisa," he said, setting the cup down. "You have quite a set of hands on you." Lisa felt her stomach drop. She twisted her apron in her hands. "I am so sorry, sir. I know I wasn't supposed to touch the equipment. I just saw the old man and..." He held up a hand to stop her. "Save it. I was watching." The bride's father was watching, too. He was actually quite moved. "He told me if I fired you, he would never hire this catering company again." Lisa blinked, her mouth falling open slightly. He said that." "He did," the manager said, cracking a rare, small smile. "He told me that was the highlight of the wedding. Apparently, his family hasn't stopped talking about it. You turned a boring evening into something special, kid. That's hard to do." Lisa let out a long breath she didn't know she was holding. "So I'm not in trouble?" "You're not in trouble. In fact, the father of the bride asked for you. He's out by the entrance. He wants to have a word." Lisa's heart skipped a beat. She dried her hands on a towel and walked back out into the lobby area, smoothing her hair and trying to look presentable. Standing near the exit was the bride's father. He was a tall, imposing man in a tuxedo, talking on his phone. When he saw Lisa, he ended the call quickly and walked over to her. "Ah, the mystery pianist," he said. His voice was deep and commanding. "Mr." Lisa started, then realized she didn't know his name. "You can call me sir," he said with a kind nod. "I just wanted to thank you personally. That was a very brave thing you did. And the music, it was exceptional. Thank you, sir. I was just happy to help." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a white envelope. It was thick. He held it out to her. "This is for you. A tip, from the family." Lisa hesitated. "Oh, I couldn't. I was just doing my job, well, sort of." "Take it," he insisted, pressing it into her hand. "You earned it. You have a gift, young lady. Don't waste it serving people like us. You belong on a stage." With that, he turned and walked back toward the party. Lisa stood there in the quiet lobby, holding the envelope. It felt heavy in her hand. She didn't open it right away, she just held it, feeling the paper corners dig into her palm. It felt like validation. It felt like hope. She walked back through the hall to finish her shift. The guests were still having fun, but to Lisa, they looked different now. They were just people. Some were rich, some were loud, some were rude, but underneath the expensive clothes, they were just human beings looking for a connection, just like Mr. Henderson. She realized that being invisible had its advantages. She saw things that other people missed. But tonight, she learned that stepping out of the shadows could change a life. The rest of the shift went by in a blur. She cleared tables, stacked chairs, and helped the cleanup crew. The other waiters kept looking at her differently. Some were jealous of the attention she got, but many were impressed. A few of them came up to her and whispered, "I didn't know you could play like that." "I didn't either," Lisa admitted with a smile. "Not for a long time." When the last chair was stacked and the last trash bag was taken out, the night was finally over. Lisa clocked out and walked out the back exit into the cool night air. The parking lot was quiet. The street lights hummed overhead. She walked to her car, an old sedan that had seen better days, and sat in the driver's seat. She finally opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of cash. It was more than she made in 3 months of working double shifts. Her hands shook as she counted it. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over and rolling down her cheeks. This wasn't just money. This was freedom. This was rent paid for months. This was the chance to fix her car, maybe even buy a real piano. But as she wiped her tears, she realized the money wasn't the best part of the night. She closed her eyes and saw Mr. Henderson's face. She saw the way his eyes lit up when the music started. She saw him dancing, holding onto the memory of his wife. She started the engine and began to drive home. The city lights blurred through her windshield. She thought about her mother. She wished she could call her and tell her what happened. She wished she could say, "Mom, remember how you said music is the only thing you can count on? You were right." Even though she couldn't tell her mother, she felt a sense of peace settle in her chest. She knew her mother would have been proud. The music hadn't died in that apartment all those years ago. It was just sleeping inside Lisa, waiting for the right moment to wake up. Lisa pulled into the driveway of her small apartment building. It was dark and quiet. As she walked up the stairs to her door, she felt lighter than she had in years. The world hadn't changed. She still had bills. She still had to go to work tomorrow. But she had changed. She unlocked her apartment door and stepped inside. It was small and cluttered, and it was very quiet. But Lisa didn't mind the silence anymore. She walked over to the corner where a small, cheap keyboard sat covered in dust. She pulled the cover off and plugged it in. She sat down on a folding chair. The plastic keys felt nothing like the grand piano at the wedding. They were light and flimsy. But when Lisa pressed down on them, the sound that came out was beautiful to her ears. It wasn't about the instrument. It was about the feeling. She played a simple melody, the same one she had played for Mr. Henderson. It floated through the quiet apartment, filling the empty spaces. She closed her eyes and smiled, her fingers moving with confidence. She wasn't just a waitress anymore. She was a musician. And she knew that this wasn't the end of her story. It was just the beginning of a new song, one that she was going to play for the rest of her life.